Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the Politics Guys with your hosts, Jay Carson and Michael Baranowski.
Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. My co-host this week, as always, is Cleveland area attorney and sometime Republican strategist Jay Carson. We've got two new sponsors for the show today. The first is Dollar Shave Club, the smarter choice. With Dollar Shave Club, you get a great shave at a great price delivered right to your door. You know, before I heard about Dollar Shave Club, it had been years since I shaved with a blade because I just got tired of paying so much for replacement cartridges. I mean, they lock them up in a drugstore like they're, I don't know, gold or plutonium or something. Heck, they're priced like it. But, well, Dollar Shave Club gives you a great razor and blades, and their Dr. Carver's shave butter is way better than the shaving cream I used to use. Now, Jay, I know you've used Dollar Shave Club. What's your experience been?
I haven't. I'll tell you, it's been fantastic, and I actually look forward to shaving. That sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. And the convenience of having it delivered, as opposed to having to running out to a drugstore or somewhere, a big box store, which I absolutely hate and rarely have time for. It's fantastic, and I've been thrilled with the experience.
Yeah, you know, you too can make the smarter choice by joining Dollar Shave Club. And for a limited time, new members get their first month of the Executive Razor with a tube of their Dr. Carver's shave butter for only $5 with free shipping. And after that, razors are just a few bucks a month. In your first month box, you get an awesome weighty handle, a full cassette of 4 cartridges, and a tube of their shave butter. After your first month, replacement cartridges ship automatically at their regular price. There are no hidden fees and no commitments. Cancel anytime you like. Join the club today at dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. That's dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. Okay, on to our first story for this week. The Georgia special election for that 6th congressional district, the seat that opened up when President Trump named the previous office holder, Tom Price, as his Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now, Democrat John Ossoff far outdistanced his closest challengers in the election by winning 48% of the total vote, but that was just shy of the outright majority he needed to avoid a runoff with the second top vote getter, Republican Karen Handel. The runoff election, to be held on June 20th, should attract millions of dollars and is expected to be pretty much a nail-biter. So, Jay, what, if anything, do you think this special election tells us about how things stand between Democrats and Republicans, and what do you think we might expect in midterm elections, which are just over 18 months from now?
Yeah, I'm still saying that what we can expect from this, or what we can learn from this, is not much, because as we talked about last week, special elections are special. It's a different vibe. It's a different rules, different turnouts, and I think what you're talking about of what happened here, where you had the Democrats essentially cleared the field for one candidate, and the Republicans had, as we did in the presidential election, 17, 18 candidates, and you have a relatively low turnout, and the Democrats were able to raise money and energize around one candidate. That candidate outperformed what the average Democrat candidate would. I don't think that's what's going to happen when we get to the runoff in June. I think Republicans are going to coalesce around the candidate, and I'd expect that she's going to carry the seat by I'd say 5 to 7.
Wow.
More or less typical of what that district is. Probably a little less than what the district usually is, but I don't think it's any real harbinger of something that's going to happen in the general elections, because I think it's two different animals.
Well, I agree with your point that special elections are in fact special. I don't know if a 5-point win is going to happen, because that district has been trending moderate for a while. I mean, Clinton lost to Trump by less than 2% in that district. To me, a much bigger story was what we talked about last week, that Kansas 4 district, where Democrats did not pick up that seat, but this was a district where Trump beat Clinton by over 27 points, and that was, a fairly reasonably close race. So to me, I think there are a couple of potential implications here. Well, for one thing, I think this demonstrates it's not surprising that Democrats are a lot more they're a lot more engaged. They're a lot more outraged, I guess you could say. It makes sense. They're more energized because of the environment, and I think
the party out of office always is.
Sure, and I think there are a couple of policy implications you might draw from this. Though, number one is that, looking at these results, I think there are some Republicans in Congress who might be slightly less likely to do hugely disruptive things like gut Obamacare without a decent replacement. A second policy implication, I think, is that it gives Democrats in Congress even more incentive to resist pretty much everything, basically the Republican playbook when, President Obama was president. I think because they say if the House is in play, then they definitely don't want to give Trump anything that even resembles a legislative win. So what I see this as meaning is even more certainty of gridlock and maybe making Republicans a little more gun shy to do some of the more radical things. What do you think?
I think you're right on the second point, that maybe the Democrats will continue to play gridlock just to keep Trump from getting a win. I don't know that it changes how Republicans vote or makes them more moderate. I think they still have to do something on Obamacare with repealing and replacing, and I don't know that they have to get that through the rest of their caucus. So I don't know that it changes the Republican playbook that much. I think the Democrats, again, it gives them incentives just to vote no, which was sort of the game theory type situation anyway. There was no real advantage for most Democrats except in certain swing seats and certain Senate seats. I think you're going to see that. But then a larger point to me, and I think this is where a lot of the analysis has gone wrong, is it always matches up how did Trump do in this district or that district versus how this candidate does. And I really think you have to set Trump apart from other Republican candidates. For example, last year there was the popular theory, and I subscribed to it too, was that Trump was going to hurt the down ballot candidates. And that wasn't necessarily so. There were a lot of down ballot candidates, Senate candidates, for example, who outperformed Trump. So I think to say, well, Trump only won the district by 2, therefore it's leaning, becoming more moderate. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think, again, Trump is sort of a special animal, sort of sui generis, and it's to say Trump and the average Republican candidate, I think are two separate things.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, and I hadn't certainly seen anything about that, and that gives me a little food for thought there. So thank you. That's I will have to consider that, Jay. Every once in a while, not every once in a while, on a regular basis, you have great things to say. Every once in a while, you surprise me with something that just kind of pull right out there. It's like, that's interesting. Well, we will see certainly what happens on, I think it's June 20th is the election, and certainly there's going to be an awful lot of money that pours into this on both sides.
Yep.
So, Jay, you travel for business, right?
I do. Fair amount.
I do probably not as much as you do, but our next sponsor is, I think, right up our alley, Upside.com, the best new way to buy business travel. Even if you're not a business traveler, I bet you know someone who is, and you should definitely tell them about Upside. Here's what's great about it. Every time you buy a trip at Upside, you save a ton of money, and they give you an Amazon gift card worth $100, $200, even $300 every single time. And the way Upside does it is to bundle your flights and hotel together for one low price. And bundling, of course, saves money, especially on business travel, so Upside gives you free Amazon gift cards. And if you're a frequent business traveler, your company saves a ton of money, and you can get thousands a year just for buying your air and hotel together at Upside. Plus, you still get all your miles. Now, my wife and I travel for political science conferences all the time, and oftentimes it's to present a paper that we co-authored, and I know I'll definitely be going to Upside before we book our next conference trip. So if you're shopping for business travel, check out Upside.com. It's a total no-brainer. I mean, it takes just 3 minutes, if that. It actually took me less than that to see how much you can save by buying your flights and hotel together for one low price. And Politics Guys listeners get a special deal. Use the code BIZTRIP, that's BIZTRIP, and you're guaranteed to get at least a $200 Amazon gift card for your first trip. That's BIZTRIP, the code that gets you at least a $200 Amazon gift card free. How can you not do it? Save big on travel and get a big gift card every trip. Upside.com. That's upside.com. Minimum purchase required. See site for complete details. Okay, on to our next story today, Jay. I don't think in the 2 years or so we've been doing this show, I don't think we've ever said the words Bill O'Reilly, have we?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I doubt it.
This may be the first and last time. Yeah, I don't know. But of course, he was recently fired from his job hosting the O'Reilly Factor, which is for many years has been the tentpole show for Fox News, which in turn has been the undisputed cable news ratings king for many, many years. And the firing, which comes with a pretty cushy $25 million payout to O'Reilly, came after a massive advertiser pullout after a New York Times story earlier in the month detailed a pattern of sexually inappropriate behavior by O'Reilly, all of which he denies, I should add, but one that resulted in Fox paying out millions in settlements from 2002 through 2016. So, Jay, were the Murdochs right to let O'Reilly go?
Yeah, I think so. Look, behavior. I mean, I think you sort of sometimes have to say that regardless of someone's ideology, and I'm not even sure how you describe O'Reilly's ideology, but just because they may agree with you on ideological points doesn't mean you can defend their behavior in all circumstances. And there can be conservative louts and liberal louts. And it certainly sounds as if O'Reilly is one of the former. And it's a shame he sort of had a good thing going and apparently, ruined it all by himself. I think I credit Fox for doing what they're doing. I mean, they're essentially in sort of a house cleaning mode, coming off of the Rupert Murdoch situation, which was similar in nature. And I think it's probably better for the network to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that was first, like you said, where Murdoch fired or pushed out Roger Ailes, who, of course, was essentially the founder of Fox News. And now with O'Reilly, I mean, it certainly seems like with all this, a lot of people suggested there's a workplace culture at Fox that is not exactly what you want in the 21st century. From what we've heard, that the younger Murdochs actually are trying to move Fox News into more of a 21st century culture where women are not seen as, objects to be harassed. And I certainly think that's a good thing. And Bill O'Reilly has always bugged me on a real fundamental level. And it's not because he's conservative. There are plenty of conservatives, even conservatives on TV who I respect. I certainly respect George Will. I fervently disagree with Charles Krauthammer, but I respect him. But Bill O'Reilly's always had this ridiculous, I'm looking out for you, tough guy, Irish, straight-talking, no spin zone persona. And it just always, I thought, stunk to high heaven. I think he's just a big, blowhard, like you said, lout, kind of craven opportunist. And I am so happy to see him go because he's always just giving me that visceral kind of reaction. But, to me, it also shows the power of advertiser boycotts, because this wouldn't have happened if all those advertisers hadn't pulled out. And of course, as some people have pointed out this week, it's not just conservatives who buy Mercedes or a lot of these other products. And so these sort of movements from I think it was Grab Your Wallet was one of the movements who kind of pushed on this. That can make a real difference. And so, we've seen the results of this kind of direct action. There was a similar thing a few years ago when Glenn Beck got forced out of Fox News.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not so sure it's the organized folks out there pushing it. It's probably a combination. I think it's also more just advertisers read the papers, and when these things start appearing in the papers repeatedly, decide that they would choose not to have their product associated with that person. So I mean, yeah, I get it. I think it's some of the activist thing, but I don't think you're going to see. You need to have some fire there, something there to get activated about, I guess. And O'Reilly seemed to provide it. I'd agree with you in that, stylistically, I was just never really a fan of that kind of delivery of the sort of over the top. And again, the little bit of the faux common man type approach. I think it's good. I mean, look, bad behavior is bad behavior, regardless of where it is on the political spectrum, and neither side should tolerate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I see what you're saying, but there has to be something there in the first place. But I also think there can be sort of a synergy. Certainly social media has a power to kind of keep these things in the public eye when millions of people are sharing things and with hashtags and so forth. But you're right, of course, there needs to be some sort of thing there in the first place. And without an old style news organization breaking this story, none of this would have happened in the first place. All right, moving on. We should thank our new supporter this week, Michael from Hamburg, Germany, one of our many international listeners. Around 25% actually of our audience comes from outside the United States, and we appreciate you all. And this week we especially appreciate Michael, who made a generous donation to the show through PayPal. Of course, putting out 2 episodes of the Politics Guys week in and week out takes a lot of work, and listener support, like from Michael, along with advertisers, are really what makes it possible for us to keep on doing the show. And so if you're interested in helping out, you can do what Michael did last week. Go to politicsguys.com and click on either the Patreon or PayPal donation links you'll see there. And of course, spreading the word about the show by sharing and retweeting our new show posts on Facebook and Twitter and leaving reviews and ratings on your podcast app. That helps out a lot, and best of all, it doesn't cost a thing. So thanks so much for your support. We appreciate it. Okay, moving on. Executive orders, my God, a lot of them this week. President Trump issued a bunch.
He's back at it.
He really is. And I think among the most consequential, there was one that called for a review of whether low-cost imported steel was damaging national security. There was another that orders a review of the H-1B visa program for skilled workers. And then there were 2 orders related to the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial reform legislation, one that calls for a review of banking regulations that allow the Financial Stability Oversight Council to designate certain institutions as too big to fail and then subject them to tighter scrutiny. Then there was a second that reviews what's called the Orderly Liquidation Authority, which gives the FDIC the ability to sort of slowly wind down large failed financial institutions so they don't take down more of the system with them. So I thought we should probably take these one at a time, Jay. So first, what are your thoughts on the steel executive order?
I think it's Trump trying to make good on some campaign promises. I don't know that anything's going to come of it because, again, look at what these orders actually say. They're sort of orders of, hey, let's take a look at, let's do a study, let's do some consideration. So I think it's stuff that he's doing to sort of give himself some leverage. If he wants to push back on imports at some point. The problem that he'd run into, of course, is there are other trade agreements out there that we would essentially have to either violate or find some loophole. Something saying, listen, the other country is dumping, is acting improperly under the WTO protocols and so forth that would justify this. But the authority for the president to do this, I think, is ironclad to the extent that it's a national security issue. So I don't see anything really exciting coming of this immediately. And I think the other thing is Trump will see a pushback from American manufacturers who depend on low-cost steel. So, I think it's more political than actual policy at this point. But he might use it as something of a piece down the road if he needs to.
Yeah, and this is sort of a unique way to approach it. It's based on this 1962 Trade Expansion Act, where the Commerce Department can enact emergency trade sanctions if it's in the interest of America's national security. To me, that national security argument seems like more than a little bit of a stretch, certainly. But you're certainly right that this goes in right in with his, I'm going to save the coal industry, I'm going to save the steel industry, and so forth. And, we should point out that especially people, I think when people tend to think about the steel industry in the United States, they maybe have a vision of what it was like many moons ago when it was this huge thing. But I was reading an article in the Times this week, and they gave a figure of 140,000 or so. Actually, I think that figure's a little off. I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and according to them, in May of 2016, all of U.S. steel employment, from CEOs down to the people who clean the floors, was under 90,000 people. I mean, so this is not a huge sector of the economy. Even if you saved every single one of those jobs, or even if you doubled steel employment, this is a tiny little chunk of overall.
Well, and also the other piece of it is, to the extent those jobs have decreased, diminished since the heyday of the 1960s, so much of it is due to technology.
Yep.
And changes in that world. I can give I don't have statistics. This is anecdotal, but I'm coming from Cleveland, which is a big steel center. There are plants that in the heyday in the 1950s, 1960s employed 40, 50,000 people. Today they may employ 5,000 people. But their production they produce more steel than they did back in those days.
Right.
And that's just sort of an indication of what's changed technology wise. So yeah, I think this is Trump sort of doing a shot across the bow, and to the extent that he can boost American steel production and look good doing it and say, hey, I'm standing up for it. Great. But I don't expect that he would ever pull the trigger, I guess, and really fall back on that act to place emergency sanctions.
Right. And, even if he does, and this is the other part of it I think that's really important, is China only accounts for around 2% of imported U.S. steel. I mean, and so the real problem here is, even if we put massive sanctions on, it really wouldn't have much of an effect, because what happens is China has all of this excess capacity in steel making, which they built up when they were going through this amazing growth spurt over the last few decades. And so they're dumping this steel worldwide, and that depresses prices all over the world. And so our sanctions wouldn't do anything much except for, as you pointed out earlier, raise the cost to people who are trying to build stuff in the United States. And I think you're right, they're going to get a lot of pushback from other industries who rely on low-cost imported steel, who wouldn't be able to get that if there were huge tariffs on it.
Yep.
So anyway, what about that H-1B executive order? Now, the president claims that the lottery system for awarding these visas is just no good, essentially. And of course, many critics of the program have said that it displaces U.S. workers and it depresses salaries. Do you think this is a program that is in need of review, Jay?
Yeah, I do. And I think that was pretty much a consensus across the board in the presidential election from both the Democrats and the whole field of Republicans, is that the way this program has worked, it's led to sort of abuses. The idea originally was to be able to attract high-skilled workers from foreign countries to do jobs that Americans sort of can't do, where we had deficits, where we didn't have enough people to fill those positions. And I, what it's become has been, as you said, sort of being able to bring people in and pay them less than they would have paid their American counterparts, at least to start. So I think it's ripe for review, to the extent that there's any, fundamental changes. I think it's going to have to be a more, broader, rewrite of the whole program. And that's what we'll see, I think, eventually. I think he'll come out with somewhat of a definitive plan of here's how it will work. But this is, with the stories, the anecdotes that you get of the people who have to train their replacements and so forth. I think it's a political step that he's taking, and it's smart politics. I think it sort of does no harm from a policy perspective. So far so good. If you're looking on the spectrum of Trump executive orders, I think this is probably a pretty good, reasonable one.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. A couple of points I wanted to make on this is first off, a lot of these visas in the lottery end up going to outsourcing companies where they bring people in and train them, and those jobs go back again. But even for the jobs that stay here, this is great for these certain sort of not really low skill, but lower skill than was intended for this program employers. Number one, they get people in at lower cost. And number two, if people are fired from these jobs, they have to leave the country. So that gives employers a lot of leverage. And also, they can't leave their hiring company to start a startup in the United States.
Right. It's a built-in non-compete.
Yeah. So I mean,
for those who are really high skilled.
Yeah.
And would be a threat to do that.
Yeah, so I really think that this is a step in the right direction. I agree with you, Jay. This is a program that is desperately in need of revision, and I hope something good comes of this.
And I want to say, because I don't see this as being anti-immigrant.
No, not at all.
In any way, shape, or form. I think this is more just let's rationalize what our policy is on these visas, and let's make them do what they were supposed to do in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a broader concern that some people have, saying that they're worried that our immigration policy might tilt too far toward sort of skilled professions and education, and sort of then, in a sense, end up keeping people out who don't have those sort of qualifications, and end up having some negative effect on certain regions and so forth. And I get that. I think diversity is oftentimes very much a strength, but I also think
that's really a separate argument.
Yes, exactly.
How this program should be administered.
Exactly, absolutely the case. Okay, finally, the Dodd-Frank executive orders. Of course, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump claimed that he drained the swamp, and he railed against big financial firms like Goldman Sachs. But once he got into office, he named a ton of these people the top spots in his administration. And, while he says that he wants to, in his words, review the damaging Dodd-Frank regulations that failed to hold Wall Street firms accountable, I'd say he's actually working in exactly the opposite direction by pushing yet another Wall Street-run government that makes it easier for these huge financial firms to take big risks and increases the chance that when they fail, they'll take down others with them. Jay, I'm guessing you probably don't see eye to eye with me on this.
I think you're putting more of a little political shine on it than I would.
Okay. How so?
I think there's plenty of objective evidence to say that Dodd-Frank regulations have sort of stymied the economy. There are things that there's a dynamism that's been taken out because of overregulation. That's not to say that we shouldn't make sure that those who ought to be held accountable are held accountable. But look, let's take a step back and say, did Dodd-Frank overregulate a lot of these situations? And when you have something like the 2008 financial crisis, what typically happens, both from a legislative perspective and then a regulatory perspective, is you sort of almost have a free pass. You know what I mean? When you have something that is so bad, say immediate action is necessary. I think was President Obama's first chief of staff who said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's sort of what they did. And there were a whole lot of, there were some sensible things in Dodd-Frank that were put in, but there were also a lot of regulatory overreach, legislative overreach, things that had sort of been in the liberal playbook for years, that how now's the chance to get it out there. So I think a review is in order. Is it governed by Wall Street? No, I don't think so. But look, you have to listen to the regulated community. I think I don't think that's a bad thing to do, especially when you're talking about things that are really pretty complicated, and there are a whole lot of moving parts that are affected downstream. How about that for a mixed metaphor? That the regulators may not think of.
I don't entirely disagree with you on this, Jay. I might even more agree than disagree with you, at least. Wow. Looking at it from a certain way. Here's what I mean. No no policy, no big policy that makes major changes is going to, right out of the gate, be perfect. It's not even going to be necessarily great. There are always going to be flaws and problems because there are a lot of moving parts. Society's a complex thing. And so when you pass something big, you're going to, it's going to go into effect. You're going to see on the ground all of a sudden there are some problems, and some of those problems can be ironed out through the regulatory process, and that's great. But I can't think of a single case where all those problems could be. And so good policy is supposed to be iterative, meaning that Congress passes a law and then the regulators go to work, and then you look a few years later and you say, you know what? This didn't quite work. We need to make some changes here. And this is, I think, where the fundamental dysfunction of our current system is really hurting us. Because like with this, I'd argue with Obamacare is a similar thing. Both, the two single biggest things that President Obama did, for better or worse, depending on how you look at it, we don't have this opportunity for Congress to go in and make those changes because you have such incredibly polarized sides. And they say, no, we're not going to, we just want this to fail, essentially. And that's where we run into these problems is no one wants to try to work with what we have. It's just that let's tear it down and start again. And I think that's just so incredibly damaging. And that's a recipe for really failed policies. And I don't know, what do you think about that, Jay?
Well, let's keep in mind that what he's talking about from an executive order standpoint is a review of regulations that were put in. So it's the scope of this executive order is fairly limited. It's to take a look at regulatory action that might be taken to undo regulatory action down the road. What you're talking about, and I think what's eventually going to be needed is a legislative overhaul.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
So, but I think that's we're not there yet. So I think, look, the regulatory tweaks I think are always a good thing. But look, we're going to have a bigger fight legislatively, and my sense is there may be some Democrats that could get pulled on with this. I mean, because this is the kind of thing that's big enough that you can put in some populist stuff that would appeal to both Democrats and also sort of Trump, sort of America First populists of getting rid of the too big to fail idea and holding the big guys accountable. And I think that populist theme could work to get votes. But no one has put out any sort of legislative proposal that's got any kind of traction yet on those bigger issues.
Well, I agree with you again in part, but I think the problem is what Trump is focusing on with these executive orders is exactly the wrong problem. To me, I certainly agree that there are some major issues with Dodd-Frank, but I think they tend to be major issues focused primarily on the burdens that Dodd-Frank imposes on the smaller institutions, the community banks and so forth. And I think it's really important
that because the Goldman Sachs of the world, and this is sort of the common problem in any sort of legislative or regulatory change, the big guys can afford regulation.
Exactly. And so, but Trump's executive orders don't focus on that at all. They focus on the largest of the large, cutting them more. And to me kind of feeds right into this. I think if you say, well, maybe we should review pulling back on tighter regulation of the hugest, that can't be a word, the biggest banking organizations. I mean, that's the problem, because if big banking, Dodd-Frank didn't do anything to cut down on the ultimate size of these organizations, and maybe that was a good thing, maybe not. I don't know. That's another.
Well, I would argue Dodd-Frank, because of the regulatory burden, encouraged more consolidation in the industry because those regulatory costs are higher, and therefore you need a big organization to be able to shoulder them.
Well, I think
that's sort of a separate argument. But.
Yeah, I think maybe on the lower end, the medium end, maybe, but not. I don't think on the the Goldman Sachs of the world didn't necessarily need to do that. But I see your point. But in any case, I think he's focusing on the wrong problem, given the fact that he's got such a large number of Goldman Sachs people in his administration. There are Goldman Sachs people in every administration, but the Trump administration, I think, is even more top heavy with them. I think he's listening to the wrong people on this. And this goes back to one of my more fundamental concerns with Donald Trump, is that given that there's so much that he knows so little about in terms of policy, I think he's much more vulnerable than many previous presidents have been to what his top advisors are saying. And when those people are people who spent their careers with Goldman Sachs, I think they're going to be, not because they're evil people, but just because of their previous life experiences, they'll have a tendency to see what's good for the United States as what's good for Goldman Sachs. And I certainly would say that that's not exactly the case.
Yeah, my sense is you almost get the feeling that Trump went to his advisors and said, "Hey, give me something on Dodd-Frank."
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah,
now
exactly.
he's going to move forward with it.
Yeah. I think he would have gotten a lot better advice if he talked to some community banking leaders and so forth, and I think they would have enlightened him in a way that might actually be helpful. But
there will, though. I mean, keep in mind when all these kind of things, there's always going to be public comment, and this is starting the discussion. So
you're right. That's a good point because, and some people might say, well, why didn't Donald Trump just issue executive orders overturning this stuff? And it's not that easy. Once a regulation is in place, there is a long and involved process with notice and public comment and the inevitable lawsuits and so forth. So it can take years, literally, for regulations to be overturned or changed in any kind of meaningful way. And so I think that's why he's focusing on review, because it's something that can be done, boom, relatively quickly, in a couple of months or so forth. So, but you're right, the first part of a long process. Okay, finally, State, another name I don't think we've mentioned on the show before, thank God. And sorry,
I don't think we've mentioned her.
Maybe we have. Ann Coulter, someone who makes Bill O'Reilly look like the calm, sensible voice of reason and moderation. The conservative bomb thrower Coulter was scheduled to speak at the University of California at Berkeley, but the school initially canceled the speech, citing credible threats of violence against her. Now, after
actual bomb throwers.
Yeah, exactly right. Good point. Yeah. Now, after an uproar in conservative circles, the school reinstated Coulter's invitation, but made it for a time and place where they believe Coulter's and the public's safety would not be as serious of a concern. Now, Coulter says she's still going to come this in a few days, actually, this coming week to speak. And I'm wondering, Jay, do you think that those lefties at Berkeley are censoring conservative speech, or do you think there are legitimate safety concerns to consider here?
Oh, I think both.
Okay.
And I think this sort of works hand in hand. What troubles me, and again, we've maybe reached sort of a real turning point with this campus speech debate, with the Charles Murray incident, with the Milos Yiannopoulos incident. Now with this, Heather McDonald also was sort of had a pretty bad campus experience recently. And what troubles me is, look, this has been going on for years. But now it's sort of like the left is playing along and saying, well, it's just too darn dangerous. Because of these students who, or if you want to say outside agitators, which was a wonderful phrase from the movie The Graduate. If you haven't seen it, Norman Fell, concerns about outside agitators at that institution. Whether there always seems to be the deans and the folks get up and they applaud free speech and say we're all committed to this, and we want to hear all viewpoints, and no matter how noxious, even though I don't find Ann Coulter to be noxious, I think she's obnoxious perhaps. Okay. But what she's saying is mainstream. She just sort of says it loudly. But at the same time, there's sort of the wink to the other left that will go out and set things on fire and start riots, and then blend back into the mostly peaceful demonstration. And I think that troubles me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly troubles me too, where we see this rising intolerance on both sides, really. Now, I should point out that, well, I know. I think it's on both sides. I seem to recall plenty of Trump rallies during the campaign that weren't exactly peace fest, love-ins, that sort of thing. With, in fact, Donald Trump actually encouraging it sometimes. But anyway, so I think it's bipartisan, but I think it's a problem. I agree with you there. But and I think though that Berkeley should be concerned about safety issues, and they have a good reason to. And so I think their response is understandable and reasonable. And, there were some of these groups, the Young America's Foundation, which sponsored it, and the Berkeley, I believe, College Republicans say that they're going to sue. But to me, I don't know if they have much of a case because reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on speech are perfectly okay. The courts have said so for years. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. But to me, the bigger concern is why we're seeing more of this, because I think we're seeing more of this. And I think we're seeing more of this because the news, especially, I think, social media, which is how a lot of these outside agitators are kind of organizing, is, I think, the most effective outrage machine that's ever been created. And it just feeds that sort of thing in a very, I'll use the word you just used, in a very noxious sort of way. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I should mention, kind of as an aside, I listened to a podcast a few days ago. Sam Harris, who does this Waking Up podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Sam Harris, I think, is kind of, he's annoying to me sometimes for a lot of reasons. He's one of those new atheist guys, but he oftentimes has some interesting things to say. And he had a guy on named Tristan Harris, who's a former design ethicist at Google, and he started this nonprofit called Time Well Spent. And they talk about what technology is doing to us. I definitely recommend people check it out. Really interesting. Made me think about how we use social media, even on the show, and maybe even consider some changes in how we do that. But to me, the main point here, going back to this generation of outrage, and what kills me is that it seems like that's exactly what Ann Coulter and people like Ann Coulter want. It's what they need to thrive. And so I feel like liberals, we're playing right into her hands here. It's one thing, it's one thing to do it to Charles Murray, who totally didn't deserve it. But I can understand getting outraged about Ann Coulter. But without outrage.
Well, exactly. No, I agree. Ann Coulter and Milos Yiannopoulos have made sort of careers out of being outrageous figures.
Yes, they are professional provocateurs.
As opposed to Murray, who is an academic. Heather McDonald, who is perhaps controversial columnist, but still not intentionally outrageous. That said, though, I mean the First Amendment is there to protect outrageous speech, because non-outrageous speech, at least it didn't used to be, doesn't need protection.
Sure, but I mean, but you know what I'm saying, that by sometimes violently protesting, you're simply feeding the flames and giving these ridiculous, destructive people exactly what they want. That's their oxygen. And so I just think it's such an incredibly self-defeating thing. And we've talked about this before in previous contexts, this sort of, I guess you could call it, I think we might have called it moral preening. Sort of, I will show you how much of a better person I am by shutting you down because you know.
Throwing a brick through the window, yeah.
And it just, I think people need to step back and say, I see this a lot, what exactly do we hope to accomplish here? Do we want to just sort of vent our spleen? Do we just want to emote? And how will this advance what really matters to us? And there's, I think, just such a lack of sort of rational consideration. People are just sort of, going with their guts on these things. And I think that's exactly what we need less of, not more of.
Yeah. My solution, that's not a solution, but it's a step in the right direction, would be for these campuses to actually take action against some of these people who are acting violently. So far, no one has been expelled from Sunbury for the Charles Murray incident. The last Berkeley incident with Milos, no one has been expelled, disciplined, arrested. I think there was one arrest. So administrators and the left give all this, I may hate what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. It's sort of said with like a nod and a wink to these folks who want to be violent and know that, look, they probably won't suffer any severe consequences for it. So I mean, that's sort of the concern that I have, as opposed to your typical conservative student who, if he steps out of his 3x5, free speech zone, can be disciplined for passing out flyers or whatever. So To me, I think the college administrations need to start putting the money where their mouths are. And if they're going to say that they really support free speech, then they need to do that and actually take some steps to take disciplinary action against these people who are shutting down speakers.
So are you saying that you think that there's a double standard where conservative students are more readily?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Really? Huh. I
Absolutely.
I would disagree. I would say that people who advance hate speech and violence and so forth, certainly it's more likely that they're going to be disciplined. But I think that's exactly how it should be. And I wouldn't even say that those people are fair representatives of the conservative movement as I understand it. And so I'd say that's a separate thing. So I would disagree with you on that. I'd also say that I think it's difficult sometimes to take these disciplinary steps, in part because some of the most violent people, I believe, oftentimes aren't students. They're these people who come in from outside agitators, as you point out,
outside agitators. Well, but here's the thing. So much of this it's all on video these days.
It's true. That's a good point.
And people post about it, and there's hundreds and hundreds of witnesses. So that's what makes it, again, sort of troubling that, let's put it this way. In the last Berkeley clash, there was one arrest. Now, again, you can turn on the TV and watch people throwing bricks through windows, setting things on fire, and police standing there. Look, that sends the message that, okay, I'm going to stand back and let you do this. And there won't be a price to pay.
Well,
in fact, that person is going to be sort of a hero to their own group. He'll be, hey man, I'm the guy who threw the brick.
I see what you're saying.
That's a problem.
Well, I see what you're saying, but on the other hand, then when campus police sort of really crack down on things, that then they run the risk of the overreaction and the lawsuits and hurting people who shouldn't be hurt. We've seen a number of incidents about that in the past, and so it's a difficult thing to do, and I think that people tend to err on the side of not kind of cracking down, because I think oftentimes that can lead to worse overall consequences. But I certainly understand that tension.
There's always, I just want to throw this out. This may be my favorite of this year. The best euphemism is sort of the mostly peaceful protest. That's how it's always reported in the media. That's how it's always reported by the college deans who go out and say this began as a mostly peaceful protest. Nobody ever talks about, like, we had a slightly violent protest or a moderately violent protest. And I think so next, I'm just saying, listeners, next time one of these things happens, and it will, listen for the words mostly peaceful. They will always precede the rest of the story.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. But I mean, don't you think that there's a very real possibility if the police use sort of kind of hardcore sort of tactics, that they can take something that's sort of a mostly peaceful and turn it into not quite as peaceful? I mean, crowds tend to react to that sort of thing, and that can actually, at least I believe, ratchet up the overall level of violence. No?
Sure, it could, but again, if you're going to stand by and let places burn, then the outside agitators, if you will, have already won.
Yeah, well, I see your point there, and certainly we can agree that it is not an easy job, crowd control.
I'm not talking about fire hosing people carrying signs. I'm talking about the people who are setting things on fire, the people who are jumping on top of police cars,
sure.
The people who are smashing windows. Those are folks that you can say, aha, that guy right there is not being peaceful. He's committing a crime. I'm going to arrest him.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think that,
and if the rest of the crowd supports him, then shame on them. And then they've lost that sort of moral authority to say, oh, I'm out here having a peaceful protest. If they're cheering on the guy who's breaking the window.
Yeah, no, on that note, I absolutely agree with you on that. The people who are committing crimes definitely need to be prosecuted for that. Absolutely. All right, well, that's it for this episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you've got a question, comment, correction, or if you just want to say hi, our email is mail@politicsguys.com. Our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post throughout the week is facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can do that through the PayPal or Patreon links on our website, politicsguys.com. If money's tight or you're already a financial supporter, we would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever podcast app you use, leave ratings and reviews of the show on your app, and share or retweet our new show posts and tweets. These things are the most effective ways to spread the word about the show, which in turn broadens our listener base and helps us attract donations and advertisers that make the show possible. And speaking of advertisers, we hope you check out our two sponsors of today's show, Upside.com. Remember to use that promo code BizTrip for a $200 Amazon gift card, and DollarShaveClub.com/TPG, where for a limited time, new members get an executive razor, a month's worth of cartridges, and a tube of Dr. Carver's shave butter for only $5 with free shipping. Again, that's DollarShaveClub.com/TPG. We'll be back with a new episode next week. We hope you'll join us.